G'day guys, there's no doubt that the rate of change in Warhammer 40k rules right now is insanely fast paced. So we've got new releases coming out very regularly, we've got FAQ updates coming out regularly, balanced data slates, new seasons of rules. There's an insane amount of change happening at a very rapid rate. And basically, some people love this, they think this is fantastic for the game, and some people hate it. So I'm not 100% sure which one of these two camps I fall into, so what I've decided to do is release a two-part mini-series where in one part I'm going to make the case for the progressive rapid change model, and one part where I'm going to discuss the pros for the conservative slow pace, slow change model. And then we can have a conversation in the comments below about which of these two systems is preferable. So with that being said, we're going to jump straight into the video, but before we do, just a quick shout out to my Patreon. You can sign up for as low as $4 a month, and we're giving away a free 3D printed Angron this month. All you have to do is sign up to enter the draw automatically, and this model will be in your hands before the World Leaders Codex even hits the shelves, which means you'll have time to build and paint it before you hit the tabletops in early Feb when the World Leaders Codex is in your hands. You'll be ready to go straight out the gate. So head over to our Patreon for more information on that, and let's get into the video.
Welcome to the Black God.
G'day guys, today we're going to be talking about a case for conservatism in Warhammer 40k. So the Arcs of Omen has brought a big change to the meta. It's a real huge shake-up. It's changing the points values, it's changing the army composition, it's changing, core rules for each army. There's lots and lots of changes that are absolutely flipping the meta on its head, and this is something that GW have been doing quite regularly, right? Like every 6 months they release a new season. That season brings huge changes to the game, and then also they bring out regular codexes and regular FAQ updates, all of which have huge impacts on the game. So basically, I want to make two cases. The first will be a case for progressivism, which is the argument that we should be breaking down the old structures and re-implementing new ones as frequently as possible to basically shake things up. So that video is out, so make sure you go check that out as well. But in this video, I'm going to be making a case for conservatism in Warhammer 40k tournaments and why GW should slow the pace of change down. Not stop it entirely, but just slow the pace of change down, and why they should stop breaking things that aren't broken. Like if there's an existing structure that's working, leave it the fuck alone. So that's the idea of this video. So basically, one of the things that I think people, they champion change because if there's something in the meta that's particularly powerful, or let's say toxic, because that's the words they would use. If there's something in the game that they consider particularly toxic, they want it gone. They want GW, the authorities, to come in and take it away. And what I'm going to make the case for in this video is how we can let the free market of ideas solve that challenge, which is essentially letting the meta solve that challenge. And I'm going to give a few examples from the past that are really interesting examples of how we can sort of see this happening, because GW has not always been so rapid with their progressive 40k rules. The 40k rules in the past have been very, very slow and very, very stagnated. So we can definitely look at historical examples. Obviously, the tournament scene has grown exponentially, so the examples back then were less global and were less, universal. But I think that there's still lots of lessons that we can learn from the past and the way that we used to do things, and potentially look into applying them to the way we do things going forward. So, yeah, one of the biggest challenges, I guess, that the conservative approach needs to address is what to do when something is particularly broken. And the examples I'm going to give here are Death Stars. So back in 7th edition and 6th edition, you used to be able to add characters to your units instead of just having them as a separate unit operating nearby. They used to actually attach to the unit, and then they were part of that unit for the purposes of being targeted, etc. And what that often did is that conferred any special rules that that character had onto the unit. So you'd basically, like an example was a list that I ran where take a big unit of flesh hounds, because they were multi-wound models, and then you would add in a bunch of characters that would give them things like a feel no pain save, would give them increased invulnerable saves, would give them increased strength and toughness, would give them reroll saves, like you'd basically add in like 5 or 6 characters to that unit, and then all of a sudden that unit becomes unkillable. Like the amount of damage you would need to do to kill that unit is insane. You basically made this, that was the crutch of a Death Star, which you've got this one big unkillable unit that does massive amounts of damage, and as a result, your opponent can't stop you from bringing that damage to bear. That's the idea. And we've seen modern versions of this with the Chaos Space Marine Terminators, right? They operate in a similar fashion to the Death Star. You've got all these characters that are protected by the unit, and then you buff that unit to high hell, and you operate like a single cohesive blob, and that's the power, right? And what we saw back when that was a really prevalent thing is a shift in the meta where, because GW weren't going to solve this challenge, right? They weren't, because they weren't in the business of updating rules regularly. They basically just released codexes, and they were what they were until the next edition. And even sometimes the next edition would come along and the codexes would be the same. So the problems would persist. So often you'd have this challenge and you'd have 2 years to have to deal with it, right? But what would happen is any really broken combo like that would become the meta, and then everybody would start running it, right? So you'd end up with most people running these really powerful styles of list. And as a result, instead of running that style of list, the top players would run something that directly counters that style of list, right? And that created an interesting situation where the meta itself figured out how to solve this problem, because it had to, because otherwise the game was just broken. So what we would see is people bringing Sisters of Silence in their Space Marine lists as an allied detachment, because Sisters of Silence had the ability to turn off your psychic powers. So if you've got this Death Star and you've added all these characters and then you've buffed it with all these psychic powers to make it really, really hard to kill, the Sisters of Silence would just walk up and turn off all your powers, and then the rest of your Space Marine army that would arrive via drop pods or whatever would just blast you off the table. So that was the idea. And they would also make it so that you couldn't cast powers, and they were, there was all this janky stuff that the Sisters of Silence could do. Or Colexus Assassins were another common thing that you would see that people would bring inside their list as an ally, just so that they would have an advantage into that matchup, because that matchup was so prevalent, So this is a really, really good example of GW just going, okay, cool, we're going to release this broken rule set that's just bad and completely unbalanced. But if you allow people the freedom to take it, but you also allow people the freedom to come up with ideas to solve it, you get that same sort of situation as what we have with the progressive rule set, where you're presenting with the player base with a challenge, and there is an opportunity to overcome said challenge, which is one of the most rewarding and satisfying parts of playing Warhammer 40k competitively, is that you're overcoming challenges. And the other thing about this that was a huge plus for the conservative approach, which is to, slow down the pace of change, what is that if you went to the effort of buying and building and painting an army, you didn't have to update it every 5 minutes to stay relevant. You could actually justifiably put in the effort to do it well. Learn the army well, play the army often, paint the army amazingly. Like, I know people that used to spend thousands of dollars on commission painted armies because they wanted to go to tournaments with the most beautiful, stunning army there, and they would put in ridiculous amounts of effort. But now those people they're either not attending tournaments at all because they just can't keep up, or there's people that are painting the most garbage models and they're slapping together whatever they can, mixing different legions, paint jobs together into one army, so that they're like, I need Hellbrutes. Has anyone got Hellbrutes I can borrow? Or I need, whatever it is. And then they're bringing these things to the table. And the army is not cohesive, It's painted awfully, and they're doing it because the progressive rule set is forcing them to adapt too fast. They're having to adapt their army faster than they can realistically keep up with, and that's creating situations on the tabletop where you've got these hideous armies, and it really does ruin the spirit of the game. You've also got players leapfrogging faction to faction to faction, chasing that meta, whereas you didn't really have that previously, because people would go, cool, this is my army, and I'll play it for 2 years because I'm confident that nothing's going to change. The meta doesn't really change. So if I like it now, there's a decent chance I'm still going to like it in 2 years. So I'll just stick with this one army. And then as a result, they would develop that as part of their identity. They would be they might be a Tau player. Whereas now there's no such thing as a Tau player or a Space Marine player or whatever. Everybody just plays whatever, So the conservative approach to the tournaments and the meta and the way that this could be done actually facilitates people becoming intimate with their faction, bringing really beautiful armies to bear, knowing their rules. One of the other challenges is that if rules are constantly changing, people are going to constantly make mistakes because they can't keep up with the change. And if people are trying to jump from faction to faction in order to keep up to date with what's the most powerful and what's the most relevant, army in the game, they're not going to be able to master their rules. And if they're not mastering their rules, mistakes are going to be rampant. And then with rampant mistakes becomes rampant accusations of cheating, because nobody accuses you of cheating when you make a mistake that hurts you. If you forget that you have a rule that was really helpful to you, but if you forget that you have a rule that actually hurts you, or if you get a rule wrong in your favor, people immediately jump onto the he's a cheater mindset. But it's like, well, can you blame people for getting shit wrong when the fucking game is changing every 20 minutes? Like, that's one of the main drawbacks to progressivism, is that you just can't keep up. And you can't expect, some players may be able to keep up. Maybe they don't work. Maybe they work part-time, or maybe they have one of those jobs where they can get away with reading fucking posts on Reddit all day. But if they're able to do that, then yeah, sure, they can probably keep up with the changes. They can probably read their codex. Maybe they also have the time to get 2 or 3 games in a week. Maybe they share house with other people who play 40k. Those people are at a huge advantage. Whereas the people who only get to play once every, couple of weeks, and they don't get to read because they got kids, they got family, they got a full-time job, and 40k is supposed to be an escape for them. Well, how are they supposed to keep up? They can't. And then you've just robbed them of their escape, because they can't keep up, and therefore they're not going to enjoy it when they go to tournaments. They get accused of cheating because they get rules wrong, and then they fucking end up on the bottom tables anyway because they just can't keep up with the changes. They don't know what's going on. That sucks. That really does suck for those people who don't have the time to keep up. And as a result, you're alienating that whole portion. And I would argue that that's probably the largest portion. Most players that I know, they only get a game in every couple of months. Some people I know only get time for games at tournaments. They don't get to play at home at all. They don't even have a table at home because they're just too busy. They don't have the time. So their only opportunity to get games in is tournaments, and that's why they go to tournaments, because it's an opportunity to get 3 to 5 games in over a weekend, So, and they love the game, they want to play the game, so if their only opportunity is go to the tournament, play a bunch of games, and then spend the next couple of months, thinking about it, and maybe painting up one new unit, so that they can then go to the next tournament. If you're changing things that rapidly, then those people are just going to stop playing. They're just going to disappear. So the more conservative approach is get the game to a point where it's nice and balanced, and then leave it the fuck alone so that people can continue to play. And that's where I think Nephilim got towards the end. It was at a place where it was very close to balance. If you look at the win-loss percentages for most factions, almost all of the factions were around that 50% mark. They were very close, So the previous approach that they had with the balanced data slates and stuff, where they were making very minor changes to very niche things, that's a much healthier approach, because that means that those players that only get to play once every couple of months, well, they can keep going to tournaments, and it's nothing major has really changed. They're like, oh, what changed last season? Oh, the Tyranids got a slight nerf, and Votan got a slight nerf, but other than that, everything's fine. It's like, well, they can digest that, they can understand that, and then they can keep playing their army. They might be playing their Eldar list that got no changes, and they're like, yep, cool, Eldar's still Eldar, I can do that. Whereas when they flip everything on its head, it's completely understandable that these people are like, fuck this, and they just quit. So I think GW, it's a hard balance to strike between those two. The conservative approach definitely has some massive advantages. Being able to have people understand the game, have really beautiful armies, be comfortable and competent, people not making rules mistakes because they know their rules, because the rules haven't changed, and being able to have the meta solve itself. The meta will find ways. If there is an army that's particularly strong, people will necessarily just start bringing the things that counter that army, because no army is infallible. No army has no weaknesses. So if people are bringing a really powerful army, identify what that army's weakness is, and if you want to be competitive, start bringing the stuff that exposes that weakness. These are all massive pros for playing a more conservative game, where they slow the pace of change down. They don't have to stop, but maybe instead of every 2 years, maybe every 5 years a new edition comes out, and instead of every 6 months have a new season, maybe every 12 months have a new season. And when you do the mid-season updates and the new codexes and stuff, maybe just make the changes as minor as you can make them, whilst still trying to achieve the goal that you're trying to achieve. So if you're trying to improve balance, improve it by making as minimal change as you can, which is very achievable. Like, there's tons of ways that you can approach the changes that are very minimalist, right? So yeah, that would be my advice, and that's the conservative argument. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Now I want you to comment on this and let me know what you think. Also, make sure you watch my case for progressivism, so that you can sort of have a well-rounded opinion on which of these systems is better. Because like I said at the start, I'm torn between the two. I don't know which one I prefer, the progressive model or the conservative model. I can see the pros and cons for both. So I just wanted to touch on those here. And also make sure you head over to our Patreon, where this month we're giving away a 3D printed Angron. You can sign up for as low as $4 a month, which is $1 a week, and these are Aussie dollars as well, so they're fuck all to you Yankees and Brits. So sign up over there, and yeah, I'll post out a 3D printed Angron. Hopefully it'll be in your hands before the World Eaters Codex even hits the shelves, which means that you'll be able to put it together, paint it, and hit the tabletops as soon as you get the codex in your hands, which will be a really exciting time for those of you who would like to start a World Eaters army, or for those of you who have an existing World Eaters army but want to get Angron in your hands. So yeah, with all that being said, I'm going to leave it here. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.
Welcome to the Black God.